shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
So, welcome everybody. Tonight we are going to be discussing Liber 671, or Liber Pyramidos, ritual of self-initiation based upon the formula of the Neophyte. So to begin with, there's a couple of things I should say about this. So I have worked with Liber Pyramidos in a very limited form. So I have used what we will see in a little bit, the openings and the closings of the ritual for my own personal practice. And I've actually found it to be quite effective. And given that, I have not actually done this ritual as a ritual of self-initiation. However, I am very interested in the ritual as a whole, and it's quite complex, and it takes some time to get a feel for what is actually going on in the ritual itself. One of the difficulties with this particular text is that Crowley never published an official version of it. So largely what we have are Crowley's notes scattered in different places about the ritual itself, and rubrics and scripts that students of Crowley's had as they were preparing to undergo this ritual themselves and as they were exploring it further. So it's a bit of a sort of archaeological task trying to figure out what is actually going on in the ritual itself. There are a number of different versions floating around out there. And part of what I have done is I've looked at a couple of these and tried to piece together what I think is happening in this ritual. So there are some people here tonight who are veterans, who have seen a number of these scripts and are very familiar with the ritual. And so what I'm going to be doing tonight is presenting to you my attempt to make sense of this ritual. And by no means is it complete, no means is it final. I am not an initiate of the AA, and this is simply my independent attempt to try and make sense of what is going on in Liber Pyramidos. And so if you have comments, feel free to interject at any point in the evening. If you have questions, feel free to ask those questions. General comments are welcome throughout the night. This is an opportunity for all of us to learn about this ritual. And so I hope that for those who are familiar with the ritual, that they'll be able to get something out of discussing it a little bit further. And for those of you who are not familiar with this ritual, I hope that it can provide you with some motivation to maybe follow up on some of this stuff a little bit further. Okay, so with that being said, I want to begin by reading a chapter from the Book of Lies. This is chapter 15 of the Book of Lies, the Gun Barrel. Mighty and erect is this will of mine, this pyramid of fire whose summit is lost in heaven. Upon it have I burned the corpse of my desires. Mighty and erect is this phallus of my will. The seed thereof is that which I have borne within me from eternity, and it is lost within the body of Our Lady of the Stars. I am not I am but an hollow tube to bring down fire from heaven. Mighty and marvelous is this weakness, this heaven which draweth me into her womb, this dome which hideth, which absorbeth me. This is the night wherein I am lost, the love through which I am no longer I. Okay, so I want to begin with a bit of historical context for the creation of Liber Pyramidos and some of the symbolic and esoteric precursors which led up to Crowley writing Liber Pyramidos. So in November 1899, Aleister Crowley joined the Golden Dawn. And this was a pivotal moment in Aleister Crowley's career, which created a lasting impression upon him throughout the rest of his life. Interestingly, at this time, the Golden Dawn was already embroiled in some deep controversy. There are several factions in the Golden Dawn fighting for dominance within the order. And Crowley actually was only in the Dawn for a very short period of time. I think it was just under 2 years that Crowley was officially in the Golden Dawn itself. But he progressed through the initiations rapidly, and he absorbed the material thoroughly. And it's clear from a lot of his later work that it left a lasting impression upon him. Okay. So like I was saying, there were some deep schisms in the Golden Dawn. And essentially there were two different camps. One was led by Francis Farr and the other by MacGregor Mathers. And Crowley ended up siding with the Mathers faction. And so I think it was in July 1900, Crowley had basically gone through all of the initiations up to Adeptus Minor and was about to take, or was wanting to take his initiation into the Second Order of the Golden Dawn. And he traveled to Paris to meet with Mathers. Mathers granted him access to the Second Order, and upon doing so, Crowley was entitled to receive what are known as the Z documents. And the Z documents are basically some papers that Mathers and a couple of others compiled together from a variety of different sources, which talk about some of the magical formula employed in the Neophyte ceremony of the Golden Dawn, the temple layout, the officers, etc., etc., etc. And so Crowley traveled back to London to the Isis Urania temple to get these documents, and they were denied him. So you can't have these documents. And so Crowley traveled back to Paris and spoke with Mathers, and Mathers sent him again back to London as basically his emissary to try and take the order back. And so essentially what Crowley does is he attempts a coup of the Isis Urania temple, and there's a very nice anecdote if you want to look into that a little bit further about how that went down. And it failed, right? It was a failed coup, and legal charges were pressed against Mathers, and this is basically the point in which Mathers loses control over the Golden Dawn. So Crowley was beginning to be a bit disheartened about the prospects of the Golden Dawn generally, and Mathers basically instructs him to travel around and take the knowledge that he has learned from his ceremonies and perform the Neophyte rituals in various places. And Crowley kind of does this, but not really. So one of his first trips is in July 1900. He goes on a mountaineering expedition to Mexico. And while he's in Mexico, he meets this guy, Don Jesus Medina, who confers upon him the 33rd degree ceremony of the Scottish Rite. And in exchange for that, Crowley teaches him about Kabbalah and magic. And they end up forming an order together. The Order of the Light of the Invisible Lamp, which the acronym is LIL, which is also the first Enochian Aether in the series of Enochian Aethers, the 30 Enochian Aethers. And what's interesting about this is that when Crowley is developing the initiation rituals for the Light of the Invisible Lamp, they're largely based upon the Neophyte ceremony of the Golden Dawn, right? Crowley's rewriting stuff at the time. So the Golden Dawn ritual, the Neophyte ritual, has a bunch of officers. Crowley simplified things down in the initiation ceremony for Lil to just one initiator and a candidate, right? And so this is something Crowley will continually do. He'll take long-winded initiations and strip them down to their basic components and try to simplify them and make them as streamlined as possible. And we see him doing that with the Neophyte ceremony with Don Jesus Medina. The order doesn't go anywhere, right? It fizzles out pretty quickly. So by all accounts, it's a failure. But I think it is instructive because it shows that what Crowley was doing was taking the material that he learned in the Golden Dawn and trying to transform it into his own system, right? Using sort of the general framework of that initiatory material and employing it for his own purposes. So in 1901, he travels to Ceylon and studies yoga and meditation with Alan Bennett. A lot of that material is the material which ends up in Book 4, the meditation rituals, asana, pranayama, so on and so forth. And then in 1902, he undertakes a K2 expedition with Oscar Eckenstein and picks up a lot of material from Eckenstein too, which will also be foundational for the system of the AA, which he develops not long after. And then in 1903, he goes back to Scotland, to Boleskine House. And he purchases Boleskine House, right, with the intent of performing the Abramelin ritual. And for those who aren't familiar with the Abramelin ritual, it's a 16th century German grimoire designed for contacting one's holy guardian angel, for achieving knowledge and conversation of one's holy guardian angel, which is thought of as one's divine genius, right? The angel which presides over the course of one's life, right? It's basically the God of the individual, sometimes referred to as Adonai, right? One's individual Lord. However, as Crowley begins the Abramelin ritual, he meets Rose and becomes very infatuated with Rose Kelly. And they get married. And so Crowley drops the Abramelin ritual, right? And then we all know what happens next. He travels to Cairo and receives the Book of the Law in 1904 with Rose as the seer. Okay, so as Crowley recounts it, he eventually, after receiving the Book of the Law, he loses the manuscript, and then sometime later he rediscovers it and fully recognizes its import and his role as the prophet of the new Aeon. But there's some intervening years here. And from what I can tell, Crowley was pretty jazzed up by the reception of the Book of the Law, and he did think that this was a communication from the secret chiefs that he had a pretty important task in front of him. And in 1906, there's some intervening years where Crowley's traveling in China with Rose, but in 1906, he goes back to England at the behest of George Cecil Jones, and he writes Liber ThROA. Now, Liber ThROA is the first sort of articulation of an initiation ritual into the AA, into the Astrum Argentum, the Order of the Silver Star. And this is kind of like, it seems to me it's Crowley's first pass at an initiation ritual for a neophyte into the AA. So just some interesting things here. So Liber ThROA is Liber 671. And ThROA in Hebrew means gate, and it equals 671. We also get Torah, which is the law, which equals 671. And Adonai spelled in full. Yes?
The pedant in me is forced to remark, number one, ThROA is Aramaic, not Hebrew.
Aramaic, okay,
and
right.
Torah is hideously misspelled. It's actually Tav Vav Resh He 611.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
Crowley wasn't known for being
He was not.
super precise with his gematria, right? But he made this work, right? So ThROA equals the gate, Torah the law, and Adonai spelled in full. So if you take Aleph, Dalet, Ayin, Nun, Aleph, Yod, spelled in full, comes out to 671, right? So something like the gate to the law, the knowledge and conversation of one's holy guardian angel. Okay, and so what's interesting about this is that 1906 is right sort of at the cusp when Crowley starts receiving all of the holy books of Thelema, right? That begins, I think, like right at the end of 1906 or right at the beginning of 1907. I might have those dates slightly off, but it's right in that time.
End of 1907?
End of 1907.
He received 7 of the holy books.
Okay, end of 1907, he receives a bunch of the holy books. And this is at a time when Crowley is working with this ritual, which he seems to think is a means of making this link between himself and the holy guardian angel secure. And in 1907, Crowley and George Cecil Jones resolve to establish the AA, so they make their plans to formulate the AA. And in 1908, we find Crowley in Paris. And during this time, Crowley is writing in his diary, and the diary from this period is what has come to be known as the Diary of John St. John, which was Crowley's sort of exemplification of what a magical diary should look like. And in this diary, Crowley talks about rewriting ThROA as a standalone self-initiation ritual into the AA, right? So he's formulating his plans to develop the ritual during this time. So here's just a small quote from John St. John, from Crowley. So this is like at 1 p.m. I rise and open unto my beloved. May it be granted unto me in the daylight of this day to construct from 671 a perfect ritual of self-initiation, so as to avoid the constant difficulty of assuming various God forms. Then let that ritual be a constant and perfect link between us, so that at all times I may be perfect in thy knowledge and conversation. O mine holy guardian angel, to whom I have aspired these 10 years past. Right, so I think what we see here is that Liber ThROA and Liber Pyramidos, one of the main functions, as far as I can tell, is the knowledge and conversation of one's holy guardian angel. The reception of that divine light and the making firm of that relationship. Okay, so that's 1908, and then in 1909, the system of the AA is firmly established. And Liber Pyramidos is the central rite of initiation into the AA. So any questions or comments so far? Okay, so I think this gives us sort of a nice development here. Crowley takes his Neophyte initiation to the Golden Dawn. Super impressed by all that, progresses through it very rapidly, but the Golden Dawn blows up, right? And eventually just turns into a bunch of splinter groups and dissolves. But the material lasts, right, in Crowley. And he begins to, through all of his other mystical and magical endeavors, integrate that material into the system of initiation in the AA. And so there's a couple of things that I want to say about the Neophyte ritual of the Golden Dawn, because I think it provides us a little bit of context for some of the symbolism that shows up in Liber Pyramidos. I'm going to we could spend a whole class on the Neophyte ritual of the Golden Dawns. It's a fairly complex ritual, very intricate, very interesting in and of itself. So I'm just going to do some very brief highlights here. So in Book 4, Crowley has a chapter in Magic in Theory and Practice on the formula of the Neophyte. And he basically says something like this. The formula of the Neophyte is to take an individual who is blind and bound by spiritual ignorance and inertia, endow them with a certain force, essentially the force of divine light, the force of one's true will, and set them in balanced motion in a given direction, right, on their particular starry orbit, right?
A push start.
A push start, right? The blind and the the blind and the bounded neophyte, right, is infused with an influx of divine light, and that pushes them on their way of initiation, onto the path of initiation. Okay, in the Z documents, which I mentioned earlier, part of what's being explained in those documents is the magical formula formulas which are being employed in the Neophyte ceremony. And so one of the things we find in the Golden Dawn Z documents is this general exordium. And so I want to read through this just quickly because some of this text shows up again in Liber Pyramidos. Okay. So, the speech in the silence, the words against the son of night, the voice of Thoth before the universe in the presence of the eternal gods, the formulas of knowledge, the wisdom of breath, the radix of vibration, the shaking of the invisible, the rolling asunder of the darkness, the becoming visible of matter, the piercing of the coils of the stooping dragon, the breaking forth of the light. All these are in the knowledge of Thoth. Okay, so the general exordium is taken to be essentially a general invocation of the light. Right? So the speech in the silence, the words against the sons of night, this is the light which breaks forth from the negative veils of existence and penetrates down into the world of the material elements. It's the light which breaks up matter and infuses it with that divine principle. Thoth is the communicator of the divine word, right? And so Thoth here utters the word, which enables the light to shine forth. And so in the Neophyte ceremony, the first thing which is done is an invocation of the light. It's a calling down of the light from the supernal triads into the temple of the Neophyte, so that that light is present in the material world of the elements. And once that light has penetrated into the temple, the idea is that the operator of the initiation or of the ritual is then able to utter the word which will create the universe of the temple, which will create the conditions such that the candidate can come in and be pushed onto the path of initiation. So this is the particular exordium from the Z documents. At the ending of the light, at the limits of the night, Thoth stood before the unborn ones of time. Then was formulated the universe. Then came forth the gods thereof, the aeons of the bornless beyond. Then was the voice vibrated, then was the name declared. At the threshold of the entrance between the universe and the infinite, in the sign of the enterer stood Thoth, as before him were the aeons proclaimed. In breath did he vibrate them, in symbols did he record them. For betwixt the light and the darkness did he stand. Okay, so that's long and somewhat complicated, but the idea here is that in the general exordium, the divine light manifests from the supernal triad, right? From Ketzer, Hokmah, and Bina, and descends down into the world of the elements. And once it's down there in the world of the elements, the magician can then make use of that light to create their own universe, right? To create the universe of the Temple of Initiation. And central to this idea is a reconciliation between light and darkness, right? So as the light descends, it penetrates the darkness, but part of the effect of that is stirring up all of the stuff which is in the darkness. And so part of the task of the neophyte in the initiation ritual, the Golden Dawn, is to stand in the balance between the light and the darkness. And it's this polar opposition between light and darkness, which then allows the magician to utter the word themselves, right? And to then traverse the path back up the tree of life. So in the invocation of the light, the darkness is stirred up, and it's the task of the candidate to balance these two elements, right? To make the microcosm a fit receptacle for the influx of divine light. And we see this idea repeatedly throughout the Golden Dawn ceremony. So another name for the Hall of the Neophytes is the Hall of the Dual Manifestation of the Truth. Right? And the initiation is presided over by this Golden Dawn deity, ThROA, who is the Egyptian deity Ma'at, essentially. And the job of Ma'at is to weigh the souls of the deceased and to judge whether they are fit to enter the underworld, the duat. And so in the Golden Dawn ceremony, we get the negative confession from the Papyrus of Ani, which is a passage from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. You're probably familiar with some of it. You've probably heard it somewhere before. There's essentially this litany of negative confessions, right? So I have done no iniquity. I have not stolen. I have done no murder. I've taken out a lot of the words of it just to give you the gist. But the idea is that as a participant in the material world of the elements, right, we're subject to blindness and to ignorance, and we can make all sorts of mistakes. And so a person who would be entering the underworld, right, whose soul would be weighed in the balance of Ma'at, would have to show that during their lifetime they were able to navigate the realm of the material world, right? That they had balanced the world of the elements with the world of divine light, and their soul was fit to enter into the underworld. And so there's all sorts of symbolism in the neophyte ritual, which is about this reconciliation of the light and the darkness, right? So you see these two pillars here. The pillars of Hermes and Solomon are Joachim and Boaz. The pillar here is a representation of the pillar of severity on the tree of life. Here, the pillar of mercy. And they're balanced, right? And the hegemon, who stands in as the higher self of the candidate, basically their divine guide in this ritual, stands in a balanced place between light and darkness, has reconciled the light and the dark, and then can lead the candidate eventually as they enter from the west, from the land of the setting sun, into the east, the place where the light rises. And with this reconciliation of the light is fit then to receive that divine influx. I also want to draw your attention to what's going on here on the neophyte altar. There's this cross, right, which is a red cross. You saw a picture of it here, right? The red cross and the white upward pointing triangle. And the cross is a symbol of the world of the elements, right? The world that as physical bodies we exist in. And the triangle here is a symbol of the supernal triad, the light from the top of the tree of life, Keter, Chokmah, and Bina, which descends downwards and infuses itself into the elemental constitution of the candidate. And so part of the task in the neophyte ritual is to receive this divine influx of light and reconstitute one's elements with that light as its core. And so there is a sacrament on the altar. So here you have a rose, here is a lamp, here is a cup of wine, and here is, what is it? A paten with bread and salt, right? And the idea is that throughout the ritual, the candidate will basically, so when the candidate comes in and receives that light, their material elements are broken up. They're sort of dispersed. And each of those parts need to be reinfused with the divine light to make pure. And at the end of the ceremony, right, this sacrament is consumed. And it's a reabsorption of those elements back into the body of the candidate, symbolizing the reconstitution of the elements of the candidate with that divine light at its core. And so this is a way, right, to symbolize the purification and consecration of the microcosm of the candidate, right, the magician, him or herself, in such a form that they are capable of receiving the light and moving forward on the path of initiation. Okay, yeah, so the white cross here is that symbol of divine light. And that red cross is the symbol of the elements. And the purpose of the Neophyte ritual is to imbue that divine light into the elemental constitution of the candidate so that they can then pursue the path of initiation. Okay. Any questions so far? Comments? Okay, so what does all this have to do with Liber Pyramidos then? So let's start talking about that. I'm going to jump right into it. And so what I was saying earlier is, look, Crowley actually never published an official version of Liber Pyramidos. So what we have are a number of different scripts and rubrics that people have used, their own interpretations, and there's a number of them. And so it's a bit of a task trying to figure out what is actually going on in this ritual. It's a part of the initiation, right? So if you plan to undertake this initiation at some point, a huge part of the task is just studying it, just trying to figure out what in the hell is going on here, right? Because there's a lot, right? There are so many layers to this initiation. We'll just barely be able to scratch the surface this evening. And so what I've done is I've looked at a couple of different copies and scripts of this, and I've tried to piece together what I think is going on here. Now, the first thing that Crowley actually writes, so it begins with the building of the pyramid. This is essentially the opening of the ritual. And what Crowley writes is, okay, so you can see how brief this is, too. The magus with wand. On the altar are incense, fire, bread, wine, the chain, the scourge, the dagger, and the oil. In the left hand, the bell he taketh. Right? So you get that instruction. Sorry?
Perfectly clear.
Right, perfectly clear. So what is going on here, right? Well, we know the magus has a wand in his hand. That's easy, right? But what about the altar, right? These things are on it, but are they on it in any particular, is there any particular order in which they're arranged on the altar? How are we going to figure out how to actually construct this altar? So what I've done here, I've just got some graphics here indicating what seemed to me to be a reasonable interpretation of how this altar might be set up. Right? It's by no means definitive, and I welcome any comments or suggestions that people have here. Okay. Okay. So one of the first things we see, let's just hold off on the wand for a moment, is the incense, the fire, the bread, and the wine. So what might those remind us of?
Elements.
Elements, right? And we have traditional attributions for the elements, so maybe that's one way of ordering them on the altar. So we know that incense corresponds to air, right? And air is in the east. So maybe we put the incense in the east. The fire. What quarter is fire attributed to? The south, right? So I use a candle for the fire. You could use a lamp or some other type of fire for your purposes. But so you have a candle there in the south. What about the bread?
Bread would be earth in the north.
Earth in the north, and wine,
Be water.
water in the west. And that's kind of nice. That does give us our cross of the elements. That looks like a red cross, but a cross of the elements there, right? So that fits pretty nice. Okay, now what about these other ones? The chain, the scourge, and the dagger, and the oil. Okay, so that's a little more tricky, but I think it starts to come out a bit when we dig further into Pyramidos. So I'm just going to lay something out here for you, and we can talk about it more as we begin to work through the text. The chain I put in the southwest. The scourge in the northwest. Thank you. And the dagger in the east. Here's a couple of things that Crowley says about these weapons in Book 4. The scourge is sulfur. Its application excites our sluggish nature. The dagger is mercury. It's used to calm too great heat. And the chain is salt. It serves to bind the wandering thoughts.
But what about the oil?
We'll get to the oil. Okay, so that's interesting because there are alchemical elements attributed to these principal weapons here. Right? He says further, just for your information, the scourge keeps the aspiration keen, the dagger expresses the determination to sacrifice all, and the chain restricts any wandering. Okay, so what that looks like to me is that triangle, right? And if we were to take the alchemical attributions, right, so let's do this. Okay, so mercury for the dagger is associated with the Hebrew letter Aleph. The chain, which is the salt, the alchemical operation, is attributed to Mem. And the scourge, the sulfur, to the Hebrew letter Shin. And these three symbols will show up once we begin building the pyramid in Liber Pyramidos. And so again, what we have here, I think, is the symbol of the divine line ascending into the world of the elements. And okay, and then we also have the oil. So where might we put the oil? Where might the oil go?
I bet you put it in the center.
I kind of put it in the center, right? Right. So Crowley says that the oil represents the higher aspiration of the magician. And if you're interested in that a bit further, we're having a ritual next week for the creation of Abramelin oil. And so if you want to get your own vial of that, you should come check it out. But the idea is that the oil represents that part of the magician, that higher self of the magician, which is drawing the lower self of the magician up to attain. Right? It's that element which spurs one. It's the call, right? The call to initiation, which draws one to pursue the path. And the weapons here, the dagger, the scourge, and the chain. So the scourge keeps the aspiration keen. The dagger expresses the determination to sacrifice all, and the chain restricts any wandering. Right? So these are elements which purify the candidate and enable them to make their aspiration pure for the knowledge and conversation of their holy guardian angel. Okay, and so in the left hand he has a bell, right? In the left hand the bell he taketh. Presumably you're going to want to set these on the altar at some point, so I set the bell up in the top right corner and the wand over here. Right. Okay, so that's just the first part, right? The magus with wand on the altar. On the altar are incense, fire, bread, wine, the chain, the scourge, the dagger, and the oil. In his left hand the bell he taketh. Right, so you can see that there's a lot just to work out from these initial pithy descriptions. Okay, so here is the temple as I see it. Some of these elements in the temple are not yet built, but they will come into play very soon. So the circle, the initiation essentially takes place in circle, right? Circular form. Triangle with a pyramid here will be built in just a moment. We'll see how it's built. The altar is here, and I've placed these two glyphs here as a representation of the pillars which were in the Neophyte ceremony. And they're not actually here, as far as I can tell, in the ritual of Liber Pyramidos, but the idea is that these pillars, the pillar of severity and the pillar of mercy, that reconciliation of the light and the darkness, will take place when the light is invoked into the temple, as we'll see in just a moment. Okay. So here's the first instruction. So the candidate says, "Hail Asi," and sounds the bell in the southwest. Okay, so we have Asi here in the southwest. So the candidate, right, will move into the southwest. Hail Asi, and rings the bell. And Asi is another name for Isis, right? And so that god form is then established in the southwest corner. Hail Huarpep, sound bell in the northwest. Huarpep, right? And we have Mem and Shin here, right? The alchemical elements of salt and sulfur. And Huarpep is a sort of a combination of Horus and Apophis, of that sort of destructive yet creative primal fire and force. Okay, so Hail Asi, Hail Huarpep, and then the magician goes back into the base of this triangle and says, "Let the silent speech beget." And there's 2 strokes on the bell. 1, 2. Yeah.
Do you want alternative interpretations?
Sure.
Because there's no direction in the actual rubrics that exist to say that you move. So you basically, you're standing there in the west of the altar, and you address the quarters. Hail Asi, and ring the bell. Hail Huarpep, ring the bell.
Right.
To get their attention.
I think that would work too. What you're trying to do is get their attention, right? Oops, not there yet. Jumped too far ahead. Sorry.
That's the one
Just
that
getting
usually
excited.
confuses people.
Okay, so let the silent speech beget. This is a very shortened form of the general exordium that we saw from the Z documents of the Golden Dawn.
Yep, just get on with it.
Right. Crowley's simplifying this material, but we know what the purpose of the general exordium is. Right? It's an invocation of the divine logos, of the word of Thoth, into the temple, so that divine light is then in the temple for the magician to use to create a particular universe which will enable them to move upon the path of their will. Okay, so let the silent speech beget, and then the text says, "Banishing spiral dance." So this is fun. Here's something Crowley says in Book 4 in Magic and Theory and Practice. Okay, so another important movement is the spiral, of which there are 2 principal forms, one inward, one outward. they can be performed in either direction. And like the circumambulation, if performed deosil, they invoke. Right? We're probably familiar with that. Like deosil is invocation. If widdershins, they banish. In the spiral, the tread is light and tripping, almost approximating a dance. While performing it, the magician will usually turn on his own axis, either in the same direction as the spiral or in the opposite direction. Each combination involves a different symbolism. Okay, so the question is, how do we do this spiral dance? Well, we know it's banishing, right? So I think, so the way I like to do this, the banishing, if it's banishing, it should be widdershins around the temple, right? That's anti-clockwise, right? So in the opposite movement that the sun moves in its course. Yeah, okay. Now, but what about the turning on the axis, right? So Curly says here that you can either, let's see, while performing it, the magician will usually turn on his own axis either in the same direction as the spiral or in the opposite direction, right? So the way in which I like to do this, so here, sorry how messy that is, but so here you can kind of get the picture, right? We're moving widdershins around the temple, right?
And spinning widdershins as well.
No.
No, spinning deosil.
Spinning deosil, right?
That's the correct.
So the opposite direction. And why I think this is so cool, right? We were talking about how the general exordium and the particular exordium are a way to invoke the light and balance it against the darkness, right? And so here we have this banishing, which is occurring, right? It's basically, so let the silent speech beget. We'll see in just a moment, it's a dispelling of the darkness so that the divine light can shine through. But at the same time, with this deosil rotation on the axis is concealed the invocation of the light, right? So implicitly here, although it's a banishing, we also have its counterpoint, its balance, right? The deosil motion. So we have the banishing, but then a very sneaky and subtle invocation of the light going on at the same time. As the darkness is being banished, the light is being brought in. And there's our candidate. And so the way I do this, I'd start in the west, go around until I'm finished saying these lines, and end back up in the west. So these are the words that one would speak. I do it while engaged in the dance. I know some people stop and then say it, but that feels awkward to me. And this is again a streamlined version of the general exordium, the invocation of the light. So here it goes. And remember, Thoth speaking the divine word, coming down into the world of the elements. So the words against the son of night, that is directly from that. The words against the son of night, to Hooty speaketh in the light. Knowledge and power, twin warriors shake. The invisible they roll asunder. The darkness, matter shines a snake. Sebek is smitten by the thunder. The light breaks forth from under. Right? So we have this descent of the light into the material world of matter and darkness, right? And that light breaking forth from the elements into the temple. And this is so powerful. Like if you really do this, I mean, when you're engaged with all of these motions and so forth, it really has a pretty wonderful effect. Okay, and so what has that done? Well, that has invoked Tahuti, Thoth, in the east, the source of the light, the source from which the divine logos comes, right? That divine seed, the stellar origin of the magician. Okay, so the candidate then goes to the west, the magician goes to the west, in the center of the base of the triangle of Thoth, Aleph, right? Again, our alchemical elements and our Hebrew mother letters. Asi, Ma'in, and Hur, Shin, right? So you should actually be down here at the base at this point. I should have put that down here. And then you say this, and this is the particular exordium. This is the recapitulation of the particular exordium for the Z documents. O thou apex of the plain, with ibis head and phoenix wand, and wings of night whose serpents strain, their bodies bounding the beyond, thou in the light and in the night art one above their moving might, establishing Thoth firmly in the throne of the East.
You're addressing the East.
Yeah. And again, we have this reconciliation of the darkness and the light, and their unification, right, of these two principles in Thoth, right? So one way of thinking about this is Asi, Isis, the divine mother, Huarpep, Shin, the divine father, and their reconciliation is what allows, their unification is what allows for the light to then descend. And you also see this in the pillars, and I wouldn't actually have these pillars here, but I just want to put them in as a representation of the balancing of the light and the darkness, and how this is playing out in Liber Pyramidos. Because it's that balance then, which is the engine of creation, which allows the magician to harness the forces of nature to enact their will, right, in the world. Okay, so what next? He lays the wand on the altar. He lays the wand, etc.
Bell.
And the bell, right? On the altar. Uses the scourge on his buttocks. Cuts a cross with the dagger upon his breast, and tightens the chain of the bell about his forehead. Okay. So what I use for the dagger is just a scalpel, right? And it's actually really easy to just get a very small cut, which the mark goes away in about 3 or 4 days. I would recommend caution if you decide to pursue that path. Be careful with what you're doing. Always start lighter, right? You don't want to hurt yourself. You don't want to maim yourself. But it's very possible to draw a little bit of blood with no problem. Yeah.
I would also like to address, for those of us of the female-bodied types, it becomes a little difficult because we have like a lot of flesh right there. So it's usually easy to make a smaller cut if you stretch your skin slightly with the other hand, because otherwise we're too soft.
Good comment. Okay, so what's going on here? So this is what the magician says: the lustral waters smite thy flood through me, lymph, marrow, and blood. Right? So essentially, this is going to be a purification and a consecration. So the lustral waters smite thy flood through me, lymph, marrow, and blood. The scourge, and I pick up the scourge and hit myself 3 times, usually kind of just in the lower back area. The dagger, cut the cross on the breast, and the chain, and tighten the chain around the forehead. Okay? Purge body, breast, and brain. Yeah.
It says that they're the chain of the bell.
Right. So one construction of the bell is a bell you can hold with a chain. Right?
In Magic and Theory and Practice, he describes the bell as having a chain of 333 links.
Right.
Whether or not that's actually attached to the bell, it depends upon the type of a bell you use.
You can see on the altar here that I have just a chain, and I imagine that is 333 links.
I count it out if I were you, dude.
Yeah.
But
But what connection between the chain and the bell specifically? Because those are like the earlier, everything was separated with no clear connection except for chain of the bell.
when you take a look at what Crowley talks about with the bell in Magic and Theory and Practice, he mentions that there is a chain. So he assumes that the bell has a chain.
Right, I'm talking about like as far as like placement on the altar, like putting it in certain places if
well,
they're
that was
connected and such.
what he did.
Yeah,
Let's see, where'd you put
so I put the bell in the southeast. Right, you can see it up here in the top right corner, and I don't have a particularly good reason for why I do that yet, other than practical purposes.
You have it on the same side with the chain, so.
Yeah, there's that.
Wouldn't the bell and the wand just placed for convenience sake?
Mhm.
It says in your
You're
left
picking them
hand, so
up,
you're
you're
putting
setting
it
them
there.
down, right? And so that's where I put them. And there are other, I think, ways of organizing the material on the altar, right? But it would be sort of a long digression to work through the various permutations.
In particular response to Brian's question, we note that this may not necessarily be the first time that Crowley has given confusing stage directions.
All right. Right.
Halfway.
Halfway mark, thank you. 8:30, all right.
You might have to do an encore.
We'll see how far we get. Okay, so you say the scourge, the dagger, and the chain purge body, breast, and brain, right? And you inflict these wounds on yourself, right? Don't hurt yourself, but inflict the wounds.
And it says, while you're saying that, you make
Oh, does it say that?
motions, yes.
Okay, yeah, so that's how I do it. So the scourge, hit with the scourge, the dagger, you cut the cross on the breast, and the chain, you tighten it around the head.
I start with, on the word smite, with the scourge.
Oh,
I just
okay.
time the rest of it.
Yeah.
So it comes together, just as an alternative.
Right, right. There are particular ways of making it flow best.
Yeah. Just for people to know to make it yours.
And then you anoint the wounds with the holy oil, right? Right, so it stings a little bit when you put it on a cut. And so you anoint the lower back, buttocks, the cross on the chest, and the forehead, and say, the fire informing, let the oil balance a seine, a soil. A seine is an old French word, which means to disinfect, right? To essentially clean. Soil is archaic English, meaning to release or absolve from a debt. So you have this cleansing, purification, and releasing from a debt is setting somebody free to go do their thing, right? So that would be a consecration. So you've purified yourself with the lustral waters. I kind of think about this flood of the primordial waters of chaos surging through my body as the scourge is hitting me in the dagger and the chain. And then this oil, which is that higher aspiration of the magician, then being infused into those wounds, right? Consecrating those elements to the performance of the great work. It's another thing I haven't said yet is that the visualizations, which can go along with all of this, are also pretty significant and can be really cool and help you generate a lot of energy in the ritual. Okay, now begins the invoking spiral dance in the West. So we're invoking now, so we're going to be moving Deosil around the temple. And again, I like that balance between the light and the darkness. I think that symbolism is central. And so the movement would be Deosil, but the spiral upon the axis would be Widdershins, right? And what you say here, so life takes fire from death and runs, whirling amid the suns. Hail, la sea, pace the path, bind on the girdle of the starry one. Okay, and so one way of thinking about this, Asi, Isis is life, Huar-Pep is death, so life takes fire from death and runs. You've sort of stolen the fire from Hades and use that to recognize your divine origin, the core of your being, Hadit, right, the core of your star, and that sets you off upon your starry orbit through the body of Nuit, right? So life takes fire from death and runs, whirling amid the suns. Hail, ah sea, pace the path, bind on the girdle of the starry one. It's really beautiful. Really beautiful invocation. Okay, and then you end up back in the West and say, homage to thee, Lord of the Word, with the sign of the enter.
Facing east.
In the West, facing east. Homage to thee, Lord of the Word, right? That divine word, the logos, the divine core of one's star. Lord of silence, homage to thee. Give the sign of silence. Lord, we adore thee, still and stirred. So on this I like to do still and stirred. Beyond infinity. And there's a formula represented in this, which it would take a bit of time to fully break down. But so homage to thee, Lord of the words, the issuing, the speech from the silence, right? The divine word coming into manifestation, breaking apart the darkness so that life can begin. Lord of silence, homage to thee. That's the word moving back into the negative veils of existence, right? Back into that silence, that movement, back up the tree to the origin. Lord, we adore thee, still and stirred. They're essentially a unity, right? 0 equals 2. We have manifestation and then the dissolution back into nothingness, beyond infinity, right? So it continually occurs. So for Crowley, it's a cosmological fact, right? It's the way in which the universe is constituted. Okay, now comes the speaking of the word in Liber Pyramidos, and this gets a little confusing, just with some of the texts that we have. So oftentimes what you'll see in the versions that are floating around is this. So a word which begins with M, and then you'll see sort of four lines or 4 dots, and then a final M here as well. And the question is, what is that word?
And that's given to you by your superior in the AA.
Right. So that's how it works in the initiatory system of the AA, is that your superior in the order will communicate the word to you to perform in Liber Pyramidos. For those of us who don't have a superior in the order of the AA, we have to try and kind of work it out what this might be, right? If anything. Yeah.
One thing that you should look for is in the recent volume, Commentaries of the Holy Books, is an actual color reproduction of Liber Pyramidos that was created by Crowley and given to Leah Hersig. It's in Leah Hersig collection. In this section, he has a weird little triangle painted with colors. And it also has a blind in it, because there's several colors, like 6 of them. And you take a look at this, when you're looking at Crowley and his hidden meanings, you're not looking for letters in the dashes. There's letters in the spaces between the dashes. So that tells you that there's a blind in that word, and you can figure it out. Especially because we all know what number Crowley liked the most.
Right, so I'll get there. And Marlene and I were just looking at that facsimile, that manuscript, before the class. It was Leah's, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous.
No, it's Crowley's.
Oh, that is Crowley's.
That is Crowley's.
Okay, that is Crowley's.
He gave it to Leah.
Right, he gave it
she
to Leah.
kept it, and it's in the Syracuse collection.
Right.
But the color really does show the blind.
Right. So another thing you'll see is this word here, mem, zadi, tet, bet, zadi, mem, which equals 271. That appears in a lot of the manuscripts.
And we know who 271 was.
Do we?
Yes, we did.
Okay, we'll have to talk about that. Yeah, who is it?
Merrill.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's cool.
Sora Merrill.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I've seen this in a number of different ones.
I know, and they all got from her.
Okay. Fair enough. And you'll also see this, which is what Marlene was referring to, which is a color scheme,
Yes.
which goes blue, orange, yellow, green, yellow, orange, blue. And that is, these colors are attributed to the king scale of colors in the Golden Dawn. And Crowley's, so the cipher here is supposed to be, if you figure out what letters these colors correspond to, then you can figure out the word. The problem is that even with the color, some of the color scales, King's color scales themselves are different. It does take a little bit of digging to figure out what those letters might actually be. However, I'll say that it does add up to a very important number in the phonemic corpus, and we use that number quite a bit on a daily basis.
You want a clue? Can I buy a vowel? Which scale of color has M being blue? You have to go look at it. Nobody's gonna have it memorized.
Yeah, you have to look. You have to look at the tables.
But that's a clue.
We can also look at that.
I knew Jared.
Also
would
do
say
that.
Okay, so then a pause, right? And you've uttered the word. And now you say, from the silence of the wand, unto the speaking of the sword, and back again to the beyond, this is the toil and the reward, this is the path of O.T.O, this is the path of O. Okay, from the silence of the wand, right? Let the silent speech beget, unto the speaking of the sword. And back again to the beyond. Again, this is this formula. And if you're also looking at the words, it's the formula which is expressed in the word. This issuing forth of the word into manifestation, and then its withdrawal back into the silence. And this continual cycle of cosmic creation. This is the toil and the reward. This is the path of O.T.O. O.T.O is the secret name of Keter, right? Divine unity. This is the path of O.T.O. We're probably familiar with O.T.O, right? The path of initiation, divine light, the magician.
For what it's worth, O.T.O in Hebrew means he.
Right. Right. Also enumerates to 12, so there's like 12 signs of the zodiac. Yeah.
And we know E-I-O is alchemical.
Right. Entirely.
To put a query about the ho, is that similar to like the way Shakespeare uses it? There's a line that comes to mind from Romeo and Juliet. Bring me my long sword. Ho! It's like, go.
Do it.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Goods go forth.
It's
Or
an
is it-
Who
exclamation.
ought to go?
Yeah.
Yeah, the gods go.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is referring to it in that sense.
I think so.
Similar.
Okay, so what have we done? Well, we've invoked these three principal deities into each point of the triangle. The divine light has manifested from the east, stirred up the darkness of matter, and now the candidate can utter the word and set this particular universe into motion. There's also something else which happens here, right? So one way of thinking about what's going on here is that in the invocation of these three God forms, their unity also arises implicitly within the temple, right? So we have the point in the center of the triangle. And we'll see in just a moment that I think what Crowley is referring to here is Iacchus, or Dionysus, the holy guardian angel, manifests in the temple through the invocation of these three principal God forms. I'll say why in just a moment. Okay, so you then either turn to the southwest or walk over to the southwest, strike the bell and say, "Hail, Aussie, thou wanded wheel, Alpha and Delta kissed and came for 5 that fed the flame." And then into the northwest, strike the bell. "Hail, who art Pep, thou sword of steel, Alpha and Delta and Epsilon met in the shadow of the pylon." Talk about the pylon as the gates in just a moment. And in iota did proclaim that tenfold core and crown of flame. Hail, who art Pep, unspoken name. Okay, so this might seem a little confusing at first because now we have all these Greek words which came out of nowhere. Alpha and Delta. For 5 that fed the flame, Alpha and Delta and Epsilon met in the shadow of the pylon, and in iota did proclaim. What is that all about?
Well, alpha is 1 and delta is 4, together make 5.
Yep.
Epsilon is 5, which together with alpha and delta make 10.
Right.
Iota is 10.
Right. And there's that. Also, alpha, if you take the A, the first letter of the Greek word for Hades is Hades, right? And if you take the delta, right, the first letter of the word for Demeter is Delta, right? And those two Greek gods match quite nicely with Osi and Huarpep. Osi is Demeter, Huarpep is Hades, guardian of the underworld. And when you combine them together, what do you get? You get the Greek letter upsilon or epsilon, which has the numerical value of 5. Now, epsilon is the first letter of the Greek word for Hermes. Fancy that, Thoth, Hermes. So you have an implicit Greek pantheon within these invocations. And I'm not entirely sure what to make of that. It is very interesting, and it shows up a bit more in the passing of the gates, the pylons, in the initiation proper. And in Iota did proclaim, so Iota is the first letter of the Greek god Iacchus, or Dionysus, suggesting that that is the invisible manifestation which then occurs. Iacchus, Dionysus, the holy guardian angel, the divine self, right? Which occurs through the unification, met in the shadow of the pylon, and in Iota, in 10, did proclaim, and in Iota did proclaim that tenfold core and crown of flame, hail Huarpep, unspoken name. Okay. So there's a lot going on.
Is Iota referring to Thoth at all?
No, so epsilon is. Yeah, so if you look at the Greek word for Hermes, it begins with epsilon. Iota is referring to Iacchus, which is here at the very top of the pyramid. Okay. Thus is the great pyramid duly built, and we have opened the temple.
That's just the beginning.
It's the very beginning. Okay. So what has happened here is that all of the symbolism of the initiation proper has been established. Now, in an initiation ritual, if this were being undertaken with other officers, right, then the candidate wouldn't come in at this point. They would only come in during the initiation proper. And if they were to come into the temple, they would be naked and they would be blindfolded. Given that there are no other officers in this ritual itself, there are still moments in the ritual where the candidate dons the robe of the neophyte and the blindfold is removed. So part of what's going on here, I think, is that you're supposed to be doing the rest of the initiation to follow, at least, blindfolded and naked. Right? And so for what it's worth, that means really having a good feel for your temple, right? Knowing where everything is, knowing how everything's constructed, rehearsing the movements a number of times so that you can move through your temple blindfolded.
Are we going to have to use spirals?
You have to do spirals.
Aletheia.
You can be blind without being
You can.
blindfolded.
You can.
Just as a matter of safety, you do have a lit flame.
Depends on how hardcore you want to go. Really? Oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen a couple of people mention this.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'd like to see them do it.
Yeah. Again, I haven't done the initiation itself. I've used the openings and the closings, right? And I find them to be very powerful. I put other magical work into the pyramid and build it and then close it. And I find that has a very powerful effect. I haven't gone through the self-initiation ritual itself. Okay, but let's begin talking about it. We'll go through this and see what's going on here. So the initiation itself involves the passing of these various pylons. A pylon is just a very large gate. And there's a particular sort of ordeal which is involved in the passing of each pylon. Okay, so the passing of the first pylon, standing in the west facing east. Again, so this is sort of the condition of the neophyte here as they come into the temple for initiation. I know not who I am, I know not whence I came. I know not whither I go, I seek but what I do not know. I am blind and bound, but I have heard one cry, rising through eternity, arise and follow me. All right, so there's that darkness, the spiritual ignorance, but that call of the light, which is putting the candidate on the path. Okay, so you're standing in the west facing east, and now you turn to face the west, which is where this first pylon or gate is. There's various instructions here that I've seen in the versions. So I've included this: give the sign of Apophis and Typhon. Right, at this point. And you say Asar un Nefer. This is Osiris made perfect, or myself made perfect. Asar un Nefer, I invoke. The fourfold horror of the smoke. Unloose the pit by the dread word of power that set Typhon hath heard. And then you get this crazy word, and Crowley just says, say this backwards. But it's very dangerous. It opens the gates of hell.
Yeah.
All right. So this word actually comes from the 10th Aether of the Vision and the Voice. It's the word that Coronzone speaks. So the way I've sort of thought about this is Coronzone is a false unity, right? It's a false Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. It presents itself as a unity, but it's really all chaos and incoherence at its core. And so this word, what it does is it breaks up, it dissolves the elements of the candidate, right? Basically, is breaking them into their various components and sends the candidate into hell. Okay. Now Crowley also remarks in Liber Aleph that hell is the unconscious. And I think this is a very practical way of thinking about what's going on here. That the hell which one is opening up is all of those unredeemed elements of oneself, the shadow of oneself, right? All those elements which one has not integrated into their consciousness and so can't yet be a part of the microcosm of the magician to receive the divine light. So all of that material, I think, is getting stirred up at this moment. One is confronting the demons, right? The demons of hell, the beasts of hell. And this is the first pylon, the first gate, the gate of hell. So where have we heard of myths of figures descending into hell before?
Where did you get the idea that he turns to face west to say that?
From one of the
Sarah and Nefer's not in the Bible.
Right, but again, I think that's just so Asaru Nefer, right? The self, the hell of the individual, right? What does that hell conceal? It conceals Hadit, the core of the star, right? Is what resides in the depths, right? And so invoking that fourfold horror of the smoke, the horror of the elements, right? Eventually leads one to the identification with their true will, with the true self, enabling them to identify with their star and then continue throughout the various gates. That would be my rationale for that. Okay, and then you say, the fear of darkness and of death, the fear of water and of fire, the fear of the chasm and the chain, the fear of hell and the dead breath, the fear of him, the demon dire, that on the threshold of the inane stands with his dragon fear to slay, the pilgrim of the way. Thus I pass by with force and care, advance with fortitude and wit, in the straight path, or else their snare were surely infinite. That's really cool.
Some of Crowley's best poetry.
Okay, so you've passed by the first pylon, right? You've encountered hell here, right? And the demons of hell. But you're saying, right, that on the threshold the pilgrim of the way, thus I pass by with force and care, advance with fortitude and wit upon the straight path. Right? You have the capacity to pass through hell. Okay, and then the candidate takes up the corpse pose, right? Marlene and I were talking about this just beforehand, and I actually recognized that this should happen here. So the candidate assumes the corpse pose, laying down.
With the words, "Who pins me down?"
Yeah, so some of this in Liber ThROA, this was written to be undertaken by a couple of officers, right? And so the candidate might actually have been clutched upon the throat and pinned down by one of the initiating officers, right? So he says, "Asar, who clutches at my throat, who pins me down, who stabs my heart, the pylon of Ma'at." The candidate stands back up, and the purification and consecration occur again. "The lustral water, let thy flood cleanse me, lymph, marrow, and blood, the scourge, the dagger, and the chain." The text seems to only call for cutting the breast here. Purge body, breast, and brain. And then anointing with oil, no?
That's the rubric, aka, so you do it all each time.
Okay, right. Okay, so do it all each time. Purge body, breast, and brain, the fire informing, let the oil balance, assaying the soil. Right, so again, you've purified and consecrated yourself, and this sets you off.
At every pylon you get to do that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that going on. A lot of cutting of the breast and spanking of the bed. Okay, so corpse pose. "For I am come with all this pain to seek admission to the shrine." The shrine is in the east, where the light resides, where the dawning of the light resides. "I know not why I ask in vain, unless it be that I am thine." And then moving to the east, "I am meant to his truth-telling brother, who was master of thieves from my birth. O heart of me, heart of my mother, O heart that I had upon earth, stand not thou up against me as a witness. Oppose me not, judge in my quest. Accuse me not now of unfitness." So this again is kind of like the negative confessions from the Papyrus of Annie in the Golden Dawn ritual. "Before the great God, the dread Lord of the West, speak fair words, for name of the candidate may flourish. In the place of the weighing of hearts by the marsh of the dead, where the crocodiles nourish their lives in the loss, where the serpent upstarts. For though I be joined to the earth, in the innermost shrine of the heaven am I. I was master of thieves from my birth. Shall I die like a dog? Thou shalt not let me die. But my coup, that the teeth of the crocodile sever, shall be mighty in heaven forever and ever." Again, you have the reconciliation of the light and the darkness here, this overcoming of the light, this overcoming of the darkness by the light. Right? "For though I be joined to the earth, to the material elements, in the innermost shrine of the heaven am I." All right, and the passing of the third pylon. So I took this from one of Juan Milo Duquette's scripts. So kneel facing east, hands above head in adoration. And what we get here are what Crowley calls the accusation and defense as antiphonies. And so what occurs here is that there will be a series of accusations and defenses that the candidate will utter. So I've just given a sample here, so I'm not going to walk through all of them right now. So here it is. "Yea, but I am a fool, a flutterer." And then the defense: "I am under the shadow of the wings." The accusation: "I am a liar and a sorcerer." The defense: "I am under the shadow of the wings."
There's
Yeah.
22 of them, that's a good number.
"I am under the I am so fickle that I scorn the bridle. I am under the shadow of the wings." Right, as Marlene was just saying, there's 22 of them, 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, 22 paths on the tree of life. So one way of thinking about that is the entire tree is being developed in the microcosm of the microcosm of the magician.
More than that, if you add the antiphonies,
Mm-hmm.
you get 44, which is the number of blood.
Oh, interesting. Nice. Cool. And then once you get to the end of this, you say, I am a traitor, die the traitor's death. And so some versions have a sword which is supposed to be on the altar as well. And so it might be an initiator, if you were being initiated, who would strike the candidate dead with the sword symbolically, or it might be the sword that you have and you strike yourself dead, or you can just fall down dead. So strike self dead with sword, but rises redeemed, saying, I am under the shadow of the wings. Right. So any questions or comments about that part? Do you have anything to add, Marlene?
I always have things to add, but this is your lecture. I'm trying to be good.
Yeah.
I like that you can definitely see the tarot trump.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Indeed. The tarot trumps, so the fool, the sorcerer, the magus magician, scorn the bridal,
Which is
high
how
priestess.
Priestess.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to look at the rest of them in that regard too.
So I was a little confused earlier between what was being said. Do we do all three of those things at each gate? Because the description seems like the strike self dead. Is that making the cross?
No, that's different.
Okay.
That is different. So those are the purifications, the consecrations. There's something a bit more intense going on here. You're striking the old self dead and rising reborn, right? It's only one point. You'll do this a couple of times throughout. You'll be reborn. Eventually, it'll come to completion. But the sword is different from the dagger, right? And the sword, as far as I can tell, the only function would be to strike the candidate dead at this point. Okay, so you've passed these first three pylons, and now the invoking spiral dance again, right? So you've arisen, right, from the accusations and defense, right? And you go on your spiral dance throughout the starry heavens. Now let me pace the path, bind on the girdle of the starry one. The star blazes on its course. Okay, so what happens now? Now there's a series of further gates which are attributed to the cardinal points of the circle which the candidate has to pass through. And the first gate is the gate of the north. And so I locate the gate right here, right? This is sort of the threshold. And then once you're purified and consecrated, you'll actually be able to pass through and encounter the deity in the north. Right? So again, we have this, a Sar who clutches at my throat, who pins me down, who stabs my heart. This pylon of the hall of Ma'at, the lustral water, let thy flood cleanse me, lymph, marrow, and blood. The scourge, the dagger, and the chain, bridge body, breast, and brain. Do the actions. The fire informing, let the oil balance, a sane, a soil. That enables you to pass through the gate of the north, and you end up in the north, and you see Horus. And you say, soul mastering terror is thy name, Lord of the gods, dread Lord of hell, I come. I fear thee not. Thy flame is mine to weave my maiden spell. I know thee and I pass thee by, for more than thou am I. Yep.
Okay, so you have us doing this at each of the pylons, and now we're going to the north, and we're doing the chain and the. Do you bring these tools with you, or do you return to the altar each?
I would
On a
return them to
practical
the.
note.
I would return them to the altar. It would be too hard to carry them all with you.
So you go and you get them, you come to the position, you use them there, then you return them to the altar,
Yeah.
come back to the position.
Yeah.
It's easier to imagine the fact that you're making a circle around the altar, so you just turn and get them
Right,
and
just
face
come in.
that
Okay,
direction.
so it's closer than
Yeah.
this is implying, okay.
Yeah. You don't have to walk 10 feet to get to the altar, presumably,
You could just turn around and get it.
depending on how big your temple is, right?
Well, you don't have to be way over on the far wall.
Sure. But yeah, I would leave all that on the altar, right? And then go get it, do the purification, the consecration, and then come back. And you're symbolically preparing yourself to pass through that threshold. Okay, and so I this is really interesting. I know so you recognize Horus, right? And you talk about his attributes. You say, I fear thee not, thy flame is mine to weave my maiden spell. I know thee, and I pass thee by, for more than thou am I. So, in other words, you're recognizing this deity as an aspect of yourself, right? And you're integrating it. So you've unloosed the gates of hell, right? And all of those elements are now sort of in disarray and have to be reconsecrated. And so Horus here is being integrated into the self as one of its primary elements. Yeah.
One of the things, I'm not sure if it was clear or not, Horus is in the north, but to get to the north, you pass that southwest. And that's where
Right.
you go through the rubric, Asar who clutches at my
Yeah.
throat, down to balance, sustain the soil.
Right here.
So you don't even get to the pylon, it stops you first, and then you
That's
have to prove
northwest.
yourself to go through. From northwest to west. West is Horus, northwest is the rubric, Asar who clutches at my throat.
I'm not sure if you want to fix it, but it looks like the recording has stopped.
Okay. It's
I
probably
think it's still going, it just says low battery. But
okay.
yeah, it's kind of blurred out, but the timer at the top is.
That's okay. Okay, passing in the gate of the south. So, okay, so now you move to the southeast. And so the way I would do this is circumambulate around once, and then 1.5 to the southeast. And again, you're stopped at the threshold here, right? And you go through the purification and the consecration, and then you move into the south, and you see Isis. Sorrow that eateth up the soul, dam of the gods, the blue sky's queen, this is thy name, I come, control and pass. I know thee, lady of teen. I know thee and I pass thee by, for more than thou am I. So again, you're recognizing Isis, and you're saying, I can pass thee by because you are an aspect of me. You are an aspect of my divine self.
What's teen?
Good question. I have no idea.
I have no idea, and that's with decades and decades.
Mm.
I even looked at other possible interpretations of his handwriting, because you know I'm crazy that way. No idea.
Okay, and then you move to the northeast, and again the purifications and the consecration. Stopped at the threshold. You do that, you can pass through, and then in the east see Thoth and silence. Call the east the dawning of the light. Okay, and then you move to the southwest. Again, purifications and the consecration. Pass through the gate, and in the west, see nature, or the self sort of the unredeemed self, right? The self of the elements. I will not look upon thee more, for fatal is thy name. Begone, false phantom, thou shalt pass before the frowning forehead of the sun. I know thee, and I pass thee by, for more than thou am I. Okay, right, so you've passed through the 3 gates. You might say there's actually 2, but I use 3 for this. So the 3 gates here and the 4 gates at the cardinal points of the compass. Okay, now the script calls for a formulation of the hexagram, and I'm not entirely sure how this is done. So here is just an interpretation. I don't know how satisfied I am with it. Now witness ye upon the earth, so the candidate says, spirit and water and red blood. So those are the elements, right? Spirit and water and red blood. Witness above, bright babe of birth, spirit and father that are God. Right? So you have this union of the material world of the elements with the light of the supernals. And then one visualizes oneself as a babe, the egg of blue. For silence duly is begot, and darkness duly brought to bed. The sword is figured in my thought, the inmost light is on my head. So the hexagram here, we know we have this triangle formed with the apex in the east. It does also look like we have a triangle, a downward pointing triangle formulated here, right? Which would place now the candidate in the center of the hexagram. So that's how I understand the formulation of the hexagram here. I also think it looks like the cross of the elements and the triangle with the candidate at the center. And you could also do a unicursal hexagram version of this, right?
Can I just give a shout out to your PowerPoint game? Pretty intense. Yeah.
I do my best. Okay, and then once you've done this, you've formulated the hexagram. Sign of Horus, attack, I eat up the strong lions, I. Fear is on Seb, on them that dwell therein. Behold the radiant vigor of the Lord. Sign of silence. Defense, I close the mouth of Sebek ply. My fear on Nile, a sar that held not in. Behold my radiant peace, ye things abhorred. So you're essentially declaring yourself as master of the elements here. Okay. Then sign of Osiris slain, so there will be another death. For see, the gods have loosed my hands. Asar unfettered stands. So this is the sign of Osiris slain. Asar unfettered stands. Hail Asi, hail Huarpep cries. Now I, the son of man, arise and follow, dead where Asar lies. All right, and now you enter into the pose or sign of the hanged man, which is made by laying down on your back, and you cross your hands over the back of your head like this so that your arms form a triangle, and your right leg goes over your left leg like that, forming another cross here, or triangle.
I'm doing it right now.
Right? And so this is kind of cool, right? You have the cross of the elements and the triangle, the supernal light, right? You form when you're doing that. This is from the book Pyramidos, Initiation, the Aeon of the Child by David Metachek, which was released a couple years ago, I think. He says, each point of the figure thus formed he crowns with light, until he glitters with the flame of the Spirit. As he does so, he shall aspire to Adonai, his holy guardian angel, with all his will. So now you're in the position of the hanged man, your head facing the west, and your feet facing the east. And this is the gilding of the hanged man, right? So you're basically consecrating all of the parts, right? All the various parts of the human body. You think about it as corresponding to the 10 Sephiroth and the tree of life and the divine anatomy of man. I gild my left foot with the light. I gild my phallus with the light. I gild my right knee with the light. I gild my right foot with the light. I gild my left knee with the light. I gild my phallus with the light. I gild my elbows with the light. I gild my navel with the light. I gild my heart wedge with the light. I gild black throat with the light. I gild my forehead with the light. I gild my phallus with the light. You could do some pretty cool visualizations at this point in the ritual as well. And again, you have the story of Osiris here, right? Osiris being murdered by son Set, right? His elements being dispersed, the 4 quarters of the universe, and then Isis coming and reconstituting all of those elements and putting on the magic phallus, right, which resurrects Osiris and enables him to rule with the divine power of kingship.
And since it's Crowley, he gets the phallus anointed 3 times.
Yeah, it's a pretty important part of this operation here. You don't want to forget it. It's good to just be sure you get that right.
I can do without it.
Okay, rise, sign of rise. So I've seen 2 different recommendations for the sign to be given here. One is the sign of Osiris risen, which would make sense. The other is the sign of Moulier, which would be arms outstretched, right, like this. And that makes kind of sense when we read through this. I think you might see why it's sort of a receptive attitude for the divine influx of light. So Asar Nefer, again, myself made perfect, or Osiris made perfect. Asar Nefer, I am thine, waiting thy glory in the shrine. Thy bride, thy virgin, ah, my lord, smite through the spirit with thy sword. Asar Nefer, rise in me, the chosen catamite of thee. Come, ah, come now, I wait, patient, impatient slave of fate. Brought by thy glance, come now, Asar Nefer, in the shrine, make thou me wholly thine. Okay, so at this point, the hoodwink would be removed, right, if you were doing that, right? So you would have done all the rest of that blindfolded. I am Asar, worthy alone. I mean, you think it would be a kind of a cool moment, right? You've done all this, and now you see the light, right? The light is now visible. I am Asar, worthy alone to sit upon the double throne. Attack is mine, sign of Horus, and mine defense, sign of silence. And these are one. Arise, go hence, for I am master of my fate, holy initiate. And then again, the secret word. Okay, and now you're fully robed. You get your robe as a neophyte, and that expresses that you have now become an initiate of the AA. Right, neophyte of the AA. The words are spoken duly, the deeds are duly done. My soul is risen newly to greet the risen sun. And then there's this, these 30, is it 30? Yeah. 30 bells which are rung. So 1, ring the bell once. 4, 5, and ring the bell that number of times for each one. So 1, 4, 5, hail. 1, 4, 5, 10, hail. There's a number of different symbolic aspects to that. 1 could be the unity of Keter. 4, the 4 worlds of manifestation. 5, the pentagram, the microcosmic man, right? And 1, 4, 5, 10, they're all unified together. And then you give the sign of the rending of the veil, right? The sign of the rending of the veil. And you say, I give the sign that rends the veil, and the secret word is uttered again. And then the sign of closing the veil, the sign that closes up the veil. Yeah.
10 minutes.
Okay.
It's about 9:20.
Well, we'll have enough time just to get through the rest of this. Okay. So again, and this is a reflection of that process of the word manifesting and the word going back into silence. You see this in the Gnostic Mass too, with the opening of the veil and the closing of the veil. Okay, so that's the initiation. And the last step is to seal the pyramid. So the rubric says, the sealing of the pyramid, same as building unto the word sons. So you'll basically go through the process that you went through during the building of the pyramid. So hail Asi, ring the bell. Hail Huarpep, let the silent speech beget. And then you'll go on your banishing spiral dance. The words against the son of night. Tahuti speaketh in the light. Knowledge and power, twin warriors shake the invisible. They roll asunder. Darkness matter shines as snake. Sebek is smitten by the thunder. The light breaks forth from under. The lustral waters. The lustral waters.
O thou the apex.
O thou apex of the plain, with ibis head and phoenix wand, and wings of night whose serpents strain their bodies bounding the beyond. Thou in the light and in the night art one above their moving might. Then you move up to the altar, the lustral water, let it flood through me, lymph, marrow, and blood. The scourge, the dagger, and the chain purge body, breast, and brain. Let the oil balance, assay, a soil. And then you go on. So instead now of the invoking spiral dance, it's another banishing spiral dance to close the temple. Right? So life takes fire from death and runs, whirling amid the suns. Now let mine hands unloose the sweet and shining girdle of Nuit. Homage to thee, Lord of the Word, sign of the Enterer, Lord of Silence, homage to thee, sign of silence. Lord, we adore thee, still and stirred, beyond infinity. And again, the Word. Okay, now here's a really cool part. I love this part. So you have these elements, right, on the altar. You have the bread, the incense, the fire, and the wine, the elements, right? And you've done all of this work to infuse the divine light into the elements, which are your elements. And the whole process of this initiation is consecrating those elements, divinizing those elements, so that they can be recombined back into the magician, so that the magician is a fit microcosm for receiving the divine light. And so now you'll actually take these into your body and seal that process and make it complete. Okay, so magician stands at the foot of the altar facing east. Behold, the perfect one hath said, these are my body's elements. Tried and found true, a golden spoil. Incense, smell the incense, take it in. Wine, drink the wine. Fire, feel the fire. And bread, and eat the bread. These I consume true sacraments for the perfection of the oil.
And you are the oil.
It's that point in the center, right? So remember the oil, the vial of oil goes in the middle of the cross and in the middle of the triangle. For I am clothed about with flesh, and I am the eternal spirit. I am the Lord that riseth fresh from death, whose glory I inherit, since I partake with him. I am the manifester of the unseen. Without me all the land of Chem is as if it had never been.
Chem, of course, being the magical land of Egypt.
Right. So you, Dabas. For from the silence of the wand unto the speaking of the sword, and back again to the beyond, this is the toil and the reward, this is the path of O.T.O, this is the path of E.I.O, and this is again like in the building of the pyramid. And so again you face the southwest. Hail, Aussie, thou wanded wheel, Alpha and Delta kissed and came for 5 that fed the flame. Northwest, hail who are Pep, thou sword of steel, Alpha and Delta and Epsilon met in the shadow of the pylon, and in Iota did proclaim that tenfold core and crown of flame. Hail who are Pep, unspoken name. Okay, so again, you've established those principal points and the secret or implicit invocation of the divine self at the top of the pyramid. Which is
One interesting scansion to mention when you're talking about the closing or the opening with the Hail Hooray Pep aspect. When it goes Hail Hooray Pep, unspoken name. There may be an unwritten direction to face the east again, because that unspoken name is not Hail Hooray Pep. You already spoke his name.
Yeah.
So who are you addressing there? You're not really addressing Tahuta, you are more addressing Asar Nefer, the unspoken name.
Yeah. That's
Just as a
yeah.
mention.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I've been trying to figure out how to make sense of the unspoken name here.
Yeah. It's
so-
a separate line in the handwritten version.
Right. Okay, and then you're back facing the east. Hail Hur, ring the bell. Hail Asi, ring the bell.
No, you're facing their corners when you say them.
At this part? Okay, well you could do that too. You could face
You could face all
up.
points.
Yeah, you could do that. So Hail Hur, Hail Asi, face these. Hail Tehuti, Hail Asar Un Nefer, right? The principal deity who you have invoked, which is your divine self, the totality of the self. Asar Un Nefer, through the rended veil, I am thyself with all thy brilliance decked. Kab Sa'am decked. Light extension. And that's it.
Woo.